The why I'm not allowed on or under table story. Or, unusual problems with polycoms. I worked in IT at a number of universities, where pay is bad and clients have unusually weird problems. On our tiny team, each person had a speciality, and my IT strength lay in the fact that I was short and light, the only person able to fit into the small, awkward places that cables and misplaced equipment can fall into. I was also the most junior, so that meant anything having to do with video conferences fell to me, because video conferences are absolute torturous hell. On this particular occasion my height was working against me. I had set up all of the video conference equipment in our newly outfitted meeting room, which had just been given a very expensive table at the whim of some administrator as well as a fancy new television stand. Everything was plugged in, but I was facing a stupid problem. The TV was off, and in the installation of the fancy new everything, someone had lost the remote. The TV had a manual button on the top of the screen, which was now about 8 feet off the ground. I couldn't reach it, and all of the conference chairs were on wheels, so that made them the last resort for standing on. The only good surface to stand on is the new table. So, I climbed up on it, and that would have been absolutely fine, as I told my boss later, because I'm light and know my limits, except that right then one of our 2 helpful student workers came in to see if they could help. They saw me get up on the table and decided that they should also get up on the table in case that made things better. We found out the hard way that this fancy table's legs were all in the middle, rather than the corners. The inevitable happens, it tipped, and I, next to the fancy new TV stand, started falling directly towards the technology. The only thing that filled my mind was that I could not damage the technology. I'm afraid to disappoint for comedy standards, that neither the TV nor table were broken. Instead, I wrenched my shoulder bad enough to need physical therapy after I did this spectacular midair twist, throwing myself into the wall instead of marring any of the technology. Because I was in IT, and we never hurt our machines. My boss, a great guy, was not pleased. Also not pleased when I marked down on the injury sheet that this was done in the normal line of duty because, as I pointed out, we had to stand on tables all the time. We didn't actually have any equipment thanks to the old, terrible boss. He bought us a ladder and made me promise not to climb any more tables, which I tried not to, whenever reasonably possible. Some background knowledge about polycoms. Before Skype existed, and then way after, a few companies realized they could make and sell very expensive microphones and cameras that talked only to each other. It's a great business model, because if your school or company has Polycom and another school or company wants to talk to you, they also have to buy specifically a Polycom, because none of the other company's machines would talk to each other. And even better, exactly the same model of machine you do. And, once you shilled out for a Polycom, why would you throw it away and use something like Skype instead? The important part is, Polycoms hate talking to each other. Each model's setup is extremely different, with some versions coming with screens that had dozens of buttons and options on them and some coming with controls that had 3. In order to get 2 Polycoms to connect at all, you needed to input a meeting code and sometimes a password. Ideally, this code was just an IP address, but sometimes the codes were absolutely whack job for no discernible reason. I was once unable to connect to a remote classroom because the room code included @sign, and the Polycom available to use didn't have @sign on the remote. Try explaining that to an impatient professor in front of a room of staring students. But sometimes you would put in the same IP address into the same machine every single week and get completely different results every time. This was especially the case with the other incident, a weekly lecture series, beamed out to multiple other schools, with a packed lecture hall and important speakers. Anyone who has done video conference work should be cringing. Multiple locations and high stakes. The connections never, ever worked correctly. The other side would unmute themselves somehow. They would forget to turn their camera on. Their TVs would break. I eventually had the personal cells of IT support at both other schools on speed dial. Nice people. Luckily, the professor who brought in the lecturers for the lecture series and I became friends, because she actually showed up for pre-lecture video testing on time each week, even though the lecturers never, ever did. She told me about unruly students and I told her about the table incident. Finally, the last week of the lecture series came, and it was a big one. The state rep for related field was the guest speaker, and the room was packed. Of course, the video equipment was failing left and right, but me and the other school's IT techs were solving problems left and right, too. We were champions at this by now. Until, with 1 minute left until the speech began, my side had a problem. Someone had managed to unplug one of my carefully taped down cables. The resulting power outage caused the central control unit to reset. This unit is what allowed the lecturer to transmit their PowerPoint to the distance locations as well as our own room's projector screen. And the projector screen itself. Resetting made the PPT stop sending, and also made the screen go up. This projector screen was a serious unit, about 30 wide and 15 tall. It takes time to go up and down, time that no amount of IT magic can speed up. It was a tense situation. In other words, I got the power restored and the PPT streaming again in record time, and told the projector, having completed its laborious trip up, to make the laborious trip down. Meanwhile, I'm determined to not have this problem happen again. So that means I need to add some more tape to the cable, which runs under the awkwardly large table on the lecture stage. What's the table even for? It holds water bottles and the professor's bags, and honestly, someone probably just put a table on the stage once and never took it away. My professor friend even made a joke about me being careful around the table. Don't hurt yourself. Yeah. It's not an unrealistic concern. I think every tech has hit their head at least once in a rushed job. I secured the cable, and in the most slow, exaggeratedly safe method ever used, extracted myself from under the table. I had forgotten about the peeping projector screen. It hit me in the back of the head as it finished coming down. And this thing is huge. It weighs a ton for something that's basically a big sheet and a weight rod. It hit me. I ricocheted forward and smacked face first into the table, and screamed "Speep!" in front of the 3 collective audiences. The professor helped me off stage and assured the state rep, sorry, she's not allowed near tables anymore. IT at universities is a special crazy. Only to rival IT in healthcare, where there are also highly educated but in addition to that highly entitled people who are treated like gods. In other words, docs think we are their personal servants to anything IT related, and even sometimes when it's not. What about IT at a university hospital? There you have academics and healthcare rolled into one. Stop threatening me. Hey you /Rusty99 Arabian. When you mentioned university IT and low pay, I felt a déjà vu. Then realized I had read your earlier post about the science machine. Anyway, sounds like your workplace could do with a safety culture. Even small meetings about workplace hazards, identifying slips, trips, and falls. Just to begin getting people to think about safety. Management should see that a ladder is way cheaper than physical therapy. I could do a story about management, but it wouldn't be very funny. In a nutshell, when I was hired there was a bad boss who was from an agency. I'm not sure why I was wholly unaware prior to him that there were agencies that hired out really wealthy managers, but apparently it's a thing. He was extremely power hungry, while being the head of a very small IT department in a poor college in a rich university, which was not a good fit. The only power he had was computers and the budget. So, he did things like buy very fancy tables. He was the one who authorized the purchase of the new meeting room, but would not buy us tools. The techs had to bring their own screwdrivers, etc. If we needed to transport 30 computers from one building to another, our hiring paperwork said we needed to provide our own transportation. So, that's our problem. One of the buildings our college owned was in a really bad area. Someone got stabbed right in front of our tech. But the computer still needed to be fixed there. So what was he supposed to do? The other techs were completely resigned to it and desperate to keep their jobs, but I was incensed. I told HR about some of the problems. HR told me I should find a way to work it out myself. Eventually bad boss got fired, and we got good boss, and things vastly improved. Providing your own transportation is generally supposed to be in reference to getting to and from work, not providing transportation of company materials on company time. I sure hope they paid you mileage. Thank you. I wish you or someone like you had been around to tell me that at the time. I really did not know that or any other rights, and the other employees were so beaten down or jaded that they didn't protest either. Unfortunately, the situation was even worse than this. It was one of the larger university campuses in America, and we weren't allocated service parking passes, so we couldn't use our cars. If we had to move 30 computers, we had a rolling cart. And because I was the only person under 50 who had a working back, me, and sometimes our secretary, who was not under 50 but was fueled by cigarettes and spite. That is just really stupid on their part. The potential risk of injury or damaging equipment far outweighs what it would have cost them to allow you to use a vehicle owned and insured by the university. So, in my experience at a few different universities, I hope one out there has it right. When they get too big, each subsection is left to themselves. The college I worked for was completely independent except for security, custodial staff, and grounds crew, and a few miscellaneous services like legal. The college didn't have any vehicles, and if we had wanted to borrow some from the university, we had to pay. I did actually look into this, because we had one building that was miles from campus, and none of us regularly had cars on campus because the parking passes cost more yearly than we made per month. We did not have a budget to rent a vehicle, and there was no one to appeal this to. If we were injured, on the other hand, that's university business. The college didn't set those staff policies, so the incentives absolutely weren't there. Luckily, just as I was getting out, There was a big unification push within the university to bring the colleges together, so now there is in fact central IT, who I really hope is better off. One thing that gets me about IT and computers in general is that the low man on the totem pole gets the jobs that the top people don't want, no matter how important they are in reality. Thus, in a dev team, the job of supervising and creating builds often goes to the newbie or even a co-op. Never mind that mistakes there can screw up the entire project. If it runs on electricity, IT must know how to fix it. Too often they're the only ones who do. Well, I understand my limits and know I probably should not be asked how the MRI/generator/oven/electric welder works. How it works? I've got you covered. Want me to fix it? Lol, nope. First you plug it in. Mash buttons until something happens. Hopefully the device does not let out the magic smoke. When that fails, RTFM and call the device's tech support. 2. When they tell you your support contract expired 14 months ago and you need an active support contract for any assistance, forward the ticket to your boss saying he needs to pay the back fees and renew the support agreement. 3. Take a long lunch. I feel your pain. I run a performing arts theater on a campus. Networked video is 100% voodoo. IT never goes right. Never. I did 5 years of video conferencing and it never gets better. All you do is learn more ways it can feep up. I can't imagine doing it for performing arts. At least in my case, I could usually tell the meeting participants to hang on for a bit or say that line again. Imagine how you feel when the tech fails in the middle of the lecture. It's like that, on crack cocaine. Absolutely. It's awful but sometimes enlightening. I once had equipment fail in the middle of a lecture of a professor who always cried whenever her computer or any other stopped working. She seemed to be under a lot of stress. So the class was staring and the professor was crying. And it was like I became some kind of cable god. I entirely recabled the control booth on the spot, fixing both the current baffling problem and future issues. I don't think it would have been possible under normal circumstances. Good hell. Well, if you're ever looking to make less money, have more stress, but work on amazing shows, you'd be a great fit on a production team. Check out /r/tech theater. Thank you. I actually transitioned from tech to graphic designer in the same department. No less, and I'm trying to figure out if there's a way I can work some of the graphic design stories onto here because they're actually worse/better. But I love theater and it actually would be really cool to see shows from that perspective. I'm going to check this out when COVID ends. I assume there have got to be some part-time/volunteer theater tech needs. I would definitely be interested in some graphic design horror stories. My friends and so are in this field. I am excited. Please ping me if you end up writing them.